terrifying and horrifying, so I drew this big mouth in the middle of his chest, like in the movie The Thing, when the guy's getting his heart jumped and all of a sudden his whole chest opens up and bites the guy's arms off. I had seen that as a kid. It traumatized me greatly. And so maybe for some reason that's why my intelligent being seems to have one finger in particular that he has raised in my illustration. I don't know if I consciously thought about that or not. But our little friend, Mr. Turtle here, he's kind of got the same idea. This is probably how a lot of nature is feeling about human beings on Earth right now. I had to throw that in there just to have some fun. But again, getting to the point of what we were talking about, the mainstream media is now fully acknowledging that UFOs exist. This is the New York Intelligencer, and you can see the date there is July 24th, 2020. So it's very recent, and it says, the headline is, the Pentagon has reportedly found off-world vehicles not made on this Earth. Well, holy smokes. I mean, this is really, really amazing because it's official. It's out there in the news. It's not a superstition anymore. It's not up to debate. They have said this, and they've said that they have multiple crashes that they retrieved. So when are you guys going to tell us about the Orion Cube? When are you guys going to tell us about the fact that both the good guys and the bad guys in our planetary secret game have been able to see the future, and so it's this constant game of cat and mouse of who gets to win the temporal war. Who can outthink the other one in the 3D chess game of time? Because each side can see what the other one is going to do. So that's part of what has made this whole thing that the Alliance is doing, that I've talked about in so many other videos, very difficult. This is not... It's a very difficult thing. There's apparently over 100,000 sealed indictments that are all going to be unsealed. Most of that will probably be after November or sometime maybe in the middle of November. We're going to get some of them before, I think. It's sure looking like it. And that's exciting too. But anyway, the Pentagon has officially said, yep, we found off-world vehicles not of this Earth, and we held on to them and we got them. Whoa. Okay, so what now, you guys? Are you just going to expect us to be happy with that for a month and a half, 2 months, 3 months? When are you going to say anything else? Okay, so you have them. Let's see one. And they talk about in here that they have materials from the thing, and that the materials have been determined to be of non-earthly origin. They have unusual properties and all this stuff. So you'd think that this is a very sober, reassuring type of article, but then let's look at the picture that they paired up with it, okay? Check this out. So here's this woman wearing these sunglasses. I believe. And there's this creepy gray there in the background. And let's read a little bit from this, because this is pretty fascinating. Oops, I was going to take the quote, and that's right, I ran out of time. The other thing I ran out of time for was to talk about this, which is, if we go back here, there's George Norrie. Okay, somebody dressed up as George Norrie. It's absolutely hilarious. And so even when they're telling you the truth, they still have to embed it in a bullshit sandwich. I guess I shouldn't have said that either. I'm sorry, everybody. So this is the moment I've waited I do have it. Okay, this is the moment I've waited my entire life for, or so I thought. But everything else is so depressing, it's like, really? Okay, so there she is up close, and here's George. Okay, so there's the analog, and then here is the real thing. See the magic of technology, how I can do that? And then what's up with the hand? I think that I think this person had an alien hand with 3 fingers, if you look at the hand carefully. So George Norrie has a dark and disturbing secret in this character that this person created. All right, so now we're really going to get into the good stuff here. I don't want to take too much more of your time, because 7 to 8, 8 to 9, it's already 9:13 on the East Coast, and I don't want to keep you up all night. So my first high-level insider, who I actually got personal access to, was Daniel. And Daniel, actually, I began talking about him and his work in roughly 2000, I guess, 4 or 5. But there's a lot of things that you don't know. And so I'm going to kind of unveil some of this for you, because very tragically and unfortunately, Daniel died this year, and he died around, I guess it was February 4th or somewhere right around that time, early February. I did get a chance to interview him here in this room, but it was by telephone. I had to hold up my cell phone to the microphone. I was looking at the levels to make sure that they were good. And he basically spilled the whole story, and he was amazingly verbally articulate. He was on a lot of medication because he was dying from cancer, so his voice slurs a little. But even so, he's amazingly articulate, spoke very, very quickly. Now, I'm going to tell you more about him because, as it turns out, this is who he really is, okay? Oops. That's me. I'm not Daniel, okay? How do I do this? Okay, let's see. Yep, I got to hit that button. His real name is Dr. Bruce Perrett. And here he is later in his life when he was working as a security guard. Now, he had never, ever allowed me to take a picture of him. And so I don't have any pictures of him. And in all of the internet, there's only 2 other pictures of him in existence, and they're both really bad if you want to see his eyes, okay? But it's all we got. So this is the first picture of Bruce, and this comes off of a particular website called, dedicated to something, this physics he was working on called the Reciprocal system. And here's another picture of Bruce where you can kind of see him smiling more. So this insider claimed that he was working on the Phoenix 3 project from 1981 to 1983. Now, what is that? The Phoenix 3 project is what most people call Montauk. So Montauk is allegedly a program in which a seat out of a UFO from one of these crash retrievals that, by the way, now they've officially acknowledged they have them, folks, okay? So this stuff is starting to sound less crazy because they've already told you that there's a UFO that they got. There's multiple UFOs they got, probably different makes and models from different people, different places, right? Different technology. Wouldn't you expect that if it has anti-gravity, that there's all kinds of cool technology in there that we don't know about right now? And if it is true that by shielding gravity that you shield time and you have a time machine, by definition, an anti-gravity machine is a time machine. Apparently, when you shield off your gravity, this is the big, big secret that everybody knows in the inside world. When you shield off your gravity, you also shield off the flow of time. And now, time doesn't move for you in that local area. Now, Einstein would have disagreed with that. Einstein would say that time is locally invariant. That's the technical physics term for it. But local invariance is wrong. Now, Einstein also kind of got around it by invoking something called frame dragging, where like the space-time fabric, as he calls it, is traveling along with you as you move through space. And so as you move through space, you're also moving through time. This is why Einstein would say that as you go towards light speed, that you're also slowing down time so that if you went back to where you came from after taking a light speed journey, it's the future, like way in the future, and everybody you knew and loved is gone. So there was a whole, there's been a whole dialogue about that, but it's as if you could only go forward in time. That's not really actually true. If you shield gravity, you can either go forward or backward in time just by traveling in a direction. And it has to do with if you travel ahead of where the Earth was when you left, you go into the future. And if you travel behind where the Earth was when you left, you go into the past. So the Earth is revolving in a certain direction. If you travel ahead of that revolution and then you come back down, you arrive in the future. If you travel behind that revolution and you come back down, you arrive in the past. Another thing they apparently found as they got into this anti-gravity and they studied these machines is that there are these eddy currents in the flow of gravity that represent essentially different dimensions. In other words, dimensionalities are enfolded in the gravitational field. Higher dimensions, other dimensions, are inside gravity. And some of these dimensions actually have time flowing backwards. So you can change the vibratory rate of the anti-gravity that you're producing, and you can get into these different zones where you can go into different parts of time. Okay? I'm going to have a lot more to talk about this, but what Daniel revealed was that the first 2 books written by Preston Nichols and Peter Moon called the Montauk Project are 100% true. And the reason is that he actually worked for Preston Nichols at this Brookhaven National Labs in Long Island. Now the official Brookhaven location on the map is west of Montauk Point, but of course they have an underground tunnel system, and apparently the way they paid for this program was with German gold after World War II that they smuggled in with submarines that they still had, and that provided the collateral to do this thing. He said that it was run by Brookhaven National Labs. They're going to deny it. Okay, that's fine. But that's what he said. Brookhaven ran the program. Okay? Now, what did they do? They got a hold of a seat from one of these crash retrievals, which the Pentagon and the New York Intelligencer and Luis Elizondo and all the partial disclosure folks are now saying, yep, we got crash disks. It's true. It's real. Okay. We already talked about the Roswell cube or the Orion cube. You hold it in your hands, you think about something, and you see the hologram shows you where it is, and then a wormhole opens up in front of your ship, you fly through it, and you go to that place. Now, Bruce, his real name is Bruce, or Daniel, we can call him either one. Bruce actually was hired there in 1981, and he didn't know what the hell was going on for a long time. It was very compartmentalized. So what happened was they handed him a series of waveforms, and they wanted him to build a computer that would generate the exact same sequence of waves at the same rate and frequency. And there's apparently like 200 waves. Well, eventually, he got to see that there was this big bundle about this big of fiber optic cables coming through the wall, and each of the fiber optic cables had a different one of these waves on it. Well, eventually, he was allowed to go into the room where the fiber optic cables were coming from, and they were all connected to a seat that looked very futuristic, and they told him that it came from a crashed extraterrestrial recovered disk. But that was later in the program. It turns out that all you have to do is have a person sit in the chair and then blank out their mind, and they had a whole elaborate protocol that they taught people how to do this, okay? Their name for it is the quiet point. You find the quiet point within yourself. You blank out your mind, you find the quiet point, and then they have these 22 different, 21 or 20, I think it's 22 different main baseline frequencies the chair is giving off through these fiber optic cables, and they have this series of oscilloscopes, something like an oscilloscope where you see the wave that the person's mind is generating. Once they get really internally quiet, the waves stop moving. The best guy was Duncan Cameron, and they almost always had to use Duncan. Nobody else was good enough to do it the way he did. And of course, Bruce interacted with Duncan at great length, as he did with Al Bielek, who he said told a lot of lies and false things, which is very sad. Preston Nichols was there. Anyway, once the person's mind hit quiet point, you'd have these 22 sine waves, and you'd turn these dials and you'd zero out the chair. All the sine waves now have to be flat, okay? At that point, this is where the magic happens. Once you calibrate the chair for the operator, if they think about a particular place, a portal opens up that will take you to that place. And if they think about a particular place and time, the portal will take you to that place and time, which is exactly the same function that the chair would have when it was in the UFO. It was a time machine. All UFOs are time machines by definition. If you shield gravity, you have a time machine, period. So there's some really, really cool stuff to talk about with all that. The original German secret space program was codenamed Kronos because the Die Glocke, or the bell, the little crafts they were making, they realized that when they used them that they were traveling through time. It becomes very obvious very quickly that you get a time slip by shielding off your gravity. So again, this sounds like it's very difficult to understand, but the physics of time travel nonetheless are true and real, and the technology works, and they've been using it for a really long time. So the plan, we're jumping way ahead now, but the plan, if you know the code name or the pro word, the plan, if you've heard me talk about that, that's the idea from the 1950s of how the mass arrests will happen and how we get our planet back. That apparently has been transmitted from our own future where we in the military-industrial complex, we humans on Earth, however it was done, have been sending this thing back in time, the plans on how to do this, through these very, very unique quantum correlated devices, or QCDs, as I'm choosing to call them, the QCD. We're going to get more into that. Okay, so let's get into the Bruce story. The real story is that I was at L&L Research, and I was staying there with Jim McCarty and Carla Rucker, the people who did the Law of One, okay? And I'd lived there since March of 2003, I guess, or maybe February, because there was an event called the Homecoming. No, it was earlier than that, because the Homecoming event was in January, and so I actually basically didn't leave. I did the Homecoming, I went back to Virginia Beach, I packed up all my stuff, and I moved to Louisville, Kentucky. I moved in with Jim and Carla, and I lived there for like a year, almost 2 years. Bruce showed up in December, and that's where, and he knew that the Law of One was the only thing that he'd ever read that seemed to articulate what he had learned in these programs. So that's where he first told me that he worked at Montauk, and I literally laughed in his face. I said, Montauk is BS, and I didn't say it that way. I laughed in his face, a big belly laugh. I worked for Preston Nichols, it's true, you can laugh if you want to, but that was real, that book is real. I said, oh, come on, man, come on. But it was only because he spent so much time talking to me about it that within about an hour of our first conversation, I'm like, wait a minute, this is way too weird. It's way too specific. He's got way too many details. And again, he's never sought publicity. He never said his real name. He never said that he was the same guy as Montauk Daniel. I mean, I guess if you really, really dug around for it, a couple people online apparently found it, his identity, but it was not anything he wanted me to talk about. He wouldn't let me photograph him. He wouldn't let me film him. And even before he died, I wanted to go out there and film him, and I was only able to get a telephone interview before he passed from cancer. And I know why he passed from cancer, because when he lived with me, he cooked Spam all the time. He fried Spam. It smelled so bad. But that's another story. He didn't really have the most healthy lifestyle. A lot of these insiders get very damaged by what they've been through. So he was working at this place, and they're handing him these graphs, and they're saying, can you build a computer that makes these wavelengths? So at first, he did it digitally, but it didn't work. And they just said, no, we're not getting the results we need. And at a certain point, what they eventually found out was that when you have a digital graph, it's always going to be like a stairwell. It goes in stair-step patterns. So you have, the wave is actually going to look like this on a big level, but then on a tiny level, it's going like this. 90-degree turns, because it's either a 1 or a 0. So they brought him in, and they started to tell him some things after he'd already been figuring out what was going on, because even before that, he was in the cafeteria, and you would literally see this kind of shimmery thing. It looks like the mirage coming off of a road, and the shimmery thing is a portal, and there will be a totally different place on the other side. So one of the problems they had in the beginning with the chair is that they couldn't stabilize where the portal would appear. And so there were people that were not on a need-to-know basis, and they were in the cafeteria, and then Bruce started to notice that guys would just pick up their trays and walk over and walk away from the portal and then keep talking like nothing happened. The first way that he started to figure out what was going on is the janitor. It turns out that people were hanging out with the janitor, talking to the janitor at Montauk Point and at Brookhaven, because the two, again, were interconnected. And the janitor started to talk. So that's how Bruce originally learned what they were doing there. At some point, they brought him in and they said, we need to tell you what we're really doing because we can't figure out how to make this work. We want you to play these waves back accurately because these waves are coming out of a person's mind, and his name is Duncan Cameron, and this is how we're running a machine that opens up portals that let you go through space and time. Isn't that cool or what? Come on, I'll show you. Let's take a look. So that bundle of fiber optic cables, he got to see the other side of the room because they brought him into his room. He could touch the fiber optics and stuff while he was working. So he went into the other room, and the fiber optics went into the chair, and here's this guy, and then he sees the portal, and he sees somebody go through, and they close the door, and the portal closes, and then, time travel is happening. One of the things that the new briefings have revealed, which I didn't realize, and this is something Bruce wasn't privy to, is that very early in this process, starting in 1981, there was Phoenix 1, Phoenix 2, and Phoenix 3. So it took them a lot of work to get up to the point of getting that chair online so that it would actually function in its capacity. They needed an enormous power supply, huge power transformers, much greater than you'd expect. Once they gave it the right power at the right frequency, which is in the Montauk books, the first two, you would have this person zero out in the chair, think about a place, and the portal opens up, and it would take you there if you send somebody through it. They were apparently rounding up people who were homeless and sending them through the portals and just see what happens, see if they come back. And most of them didn't come back. So they eventually figured out we got to build something to track them. And what they built, as the new briefings have revealed, is these spheres that were about 14 inches wide, and they're chrome and metallic. And inside the sphere are these porcelain balls that spin around, and they create anti-gravity, which again, they've had all this time with these crash retrievals to figure out how that works. The balls are surveillance devices, and they're quantum correlated surveillance devices, so you can send them into the past, and they will actually send video and audio to the present. So you can send that, you can create one of these portals with the Montauk chair, send the sphere in, and have it look around, and then send somebody there when you decide that this is a good place to go. And the spheres, of course, are also invisible, and they're a little bit out of phase with matter, so you can't really touch them, okay? They also, let's talk about the quantum correlated device for a second. Time does not exist. Time is an illusion, and this becomes a very practical reality as you're studying how all this stuff works. So the way that time actually functions is that it's a flow contained in gravity, but it's not really there. Gravity is what makes it appear to be there. If you change the rate of the flow of gravity, you change the rate of time, and if you shield gravity, you go into this parallel reality where you can travel around, and as you travel through space, you're actually traveling through time. And so Bruce ended up studying this time travel thing. So here's the next thing I want to show you. This is really cool. Bruce was so amazed by the stuff that he learned when he was in this program that he ended up dedicating his entire life to studying the physics of time travel. Now right now I'm still at only 2 hours, so we're not going to do 5, folks, but we're definitely going to, it'll probably end up being 3, so just hang in there. But you know, on the East Coast, you're going to be all right. You're going to be all right. It's very fascinating. So he was so amazed by this that he actually dedicated his life to studying the physics of time travel, and the best physics that he found was from a guy named Dr. Dewey Larson, and it was called Reciprocal System, where he says that there is a reciprocal relationship between space and time. Now, I will be the first to admit, and I do this proudly, okay, that Bruce's understanding of physics was vastly beyond anything that I could wrap my head around. And he would say, it's a speed. And then he was always talking about ratios, and it's space over time, and time over space. And so basically, I mean, I don't want to try to go down the Dewey Larson rabbit hole. When I wrote Source Field Investigations or Hidden Science of Ancient Civilizations, whichever country you're in, I went into a lot of detail, and there's a lot of science, and maybe in the future I'll start unpacking that into more videos because I've never really covered it before. But what we're dealing with is that time and space are essentially 2 different versions of the same stuff. And the stuff, you know, in Larson's science, it's only called time. Now, the law of one says, the law of one endorsed Larson's physics because Dr. Don Elkins, who was the guy asking the questions in these sessions with an alleged extraterrestrial intelligence, that's allegedly what was talking through Carla Ruckert, he would ask these questions about Larsonian physics. So the whole book, too, is very difficult to read because it's all this physics stuff that's extremely difficult to understand. So I finally did the due diligence on that in my first book that was published and talked about the physics of time and space and how they intersect. But in the simplest possible terms, the basic idea is, how in the world could Einstein say that time is one-dimensional? There is no one-dimension anything. You're in a 3-dimensional reference frame. You can't make anything one-dimensional. Anytime you're moving your finger through space, you're moving through a 3-dimensional space, length, width, and height. your planet is revolving, it's rotating on its axis, it's revolving around the sun is revolving around the center of the galaxy, right? You're always in motion. All of that motion is what creates your perception of the flow of time. If you shield that gravity, that motion no longer gives you a time reference point, and now you slip into another time frame, okay? So that's how apparently it works. In the simplest possible terms, gravity is what keeps you stuck in 3 dimensions of space with time apparently moving in only one direction. When you turn the gravity off, now you're in 3-dimensional time where you can move around and you have all these degrees of freedom. So Einstein really actually misled us by saying time is the 4th dimension. Larson said time is 3-dimensional. He has amazing physics to prove it. And as I said in my first book, he proved a whole heck of a bunch of stuff that, you know, the fine structure constant, which is how an atom jiggles when it has an electron enter or leave. He solved all kinds of astrophysics problems. He solved all kinds of quantum problems, logarithmic this and that. I mean, just it's crazy. It gets so complicated. And I'm not going to drag you through it because I don't fully understand it. I haven't actually taken the time to really dig into it. But I dug into it enough to show, yeah, this definitely looks plausible and it definitely looks true. So he studied the Larsonian physics because that was the only physics that could actually explain this weird stuff that he saw in these programs. So that's why he dedicated himself to the science of physics. So anyway, as I said, Bruce came to L&L Research in December 2003. We started to talk, and I pretty quickly realized he was telling the truth, and this was the first time that I got incredibly excited as I learned all these things I'm telling you about right now. And he insisted on an elaborate cover story. He did not want me to tell the truth about the fact that he had been there at L&L with us. He wanted me to hide that, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. You know, so we made up this story, and I do apologize, but this is how I protect confidentiality. I made up the story that you've probably heard if you watched my old videos, that I met him at a Denny's, and we actually had to target when I had physically gone to Albany, New York, and landed, so that I would have had to go to a Denny's because I did land late, and so I could prove with flight records that I went to Albany. The only thing that didn't happen is that he wasn't there, okay? But I did end up getting hungry. I did have to go to Denny's, so we had to work it out that way, and that was from his intelligence training. Now, that's not very common. I will say this, if somebody forces me to do that, to give me information, I will do it, but I always want to tell the truth, if at all possible. So typically, I don't make up a cover story. That was once kind of a one-off. Normally, what I'll just do is omit the things that people don't want you to know. But that way, we protected him, and we threw off whatever dark forces might come after him, which is very threatening, very real problem. And then getting back to the slide again, we actually lived together from October 2004 to January 2006. I paid for everything because he was fascinating me so much that I didn't need money. I was like, you just keep talking and you keep telling me this stuff, and that's going to pay your way. So we actually moved in a little tiny sleepy town called Milton, Kentucky, which was only a mile and a half away from L&L Research's separate plot of land that they called Avalon. During this time, the whole period of time, I interviewed him hundreds of times about the Montauk Project. We spoke about this every day, and every evening we watched several episodes of television together, and the 2 main things that he wanted me to see were Stargate SG-1 and a show called Babylon 5, which, again, it's a little lame, it's a little boring, but there's a lot of stuff in there that he claimed was true. He said that the extraterrestrials in the show are wrong, they don't look like that, but that the basic, whoever this guy was that did Babylon 5, and I forget his name off the top of my head, but that he obviously knew some really strange stuff. So like the Vorlons, when they're walking around with their masks, those appear to be the Draco reptilians. A lot of really strange stuff about bases where extraterrestrials get together, politics between different races, and apparently Babylon 5 was used to allow a ton of disclosure to come through. And So the other thing, of course, Stargate SG-1, going back to the slide again, both of these shows were just chock full of disclosure. Now, one of the things that he talked about with Babylon 5 that was the most fascinating to me was something that he called the Psi-Core. Now, we were never entirely clear as to whether he knew that they were called the Psi-Core or whether he made that term up. It does appear that that's what it was called, but this is another one of these really, really incredible stories because, you know, the Psi-Core, so he claimed that first of all, when he was at the base, they came up to him at one point and they started talking about, you know, white supremacy, Nazi ideology, and he wasn't into it. And if he had been, he found out later, if he had been, oh yeah, that sounds great, you know, they would have recruited him into a program that taught those kind of racist, horrible things. Another time that they came up to him and a similar kind of thing, they started talking to him about ESP. Have you had psychic experiences? Have you ever, you know, thought about somebody and then they called you on the phone right afterwards or something like that? And you, yeah, I've had all that kind of stuff. And they said, well, here's the thing. Take this card, come to this room, 9 o'clock, Wednesday night. We're going to pay for it. You're going to get a training, if you want to have it, training in how to be more psychic. We're going to bring you in. We're going to teach you these really, really cool things because ultimately what do they need? They needed people to operate the chair, and they have to train you to be psychic so that you can use the chair, okay? So the first thing that happened was that he had this interview where he sat down with this man, and the man is having a seemingly ordinary conversation with him, and it's going to take a little explanation to get to this, but the man, at the same time that there's an ordinary conversation, the man is a very trained psychic, and he is psychically attacking Bruce in his mind. Now, if you don't actually, so the interview appears to be normal, all the real stuff is going on in the psychic plane. The only way you pass and they let you into the program is if in the middle of this, you start touching your head, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know, you start yelling and really freaking out, like, you're doing something to my head, stop, what are you doing, stop. Okay, if that's what happens, congratulations, you passed, because this guy is psychically attacking you. He's actually hurting you, and apparently when you get the training that they provide, this is what happens. So they can attack other people, and he said that depending upon what your specialty is, whether you're a telepath or a telekinetic, and again, only 1 out of 1,000 people they discovered were telekinetics, okay? But if you're a telekinetic, then they really like you because now you can pinch the carotid artery in somebody's neck, restrict blood flow, and cause them to stroke out and die. So these are psychic assassins. If you're a telepath, they want to get you to do remote influencing, where if you are a successful graduate, that you could remote influence somebody to hurt themselves or kill themselves. It's very sad, and I'm sorry to even have to tell you this stuff, but this is what he told me, okay? I'm giving you the disclosure. So, they always have pro words. They don't want you to know.
So we're going to end it here. This is 33 minutes of this. I believe there's a lot of this going on. I believe they weaponize everything. I'm sure that the Third Reich weaponized everything. I'm sure that we were forced to weaponize things to keep up and to give battle. But I'm sure we're using this alien technology for various weapons throughout the universe in various battles. I'm pretty sure of that. We're going to close it here. It's about 34 minutes long. That's long enough. David Wilcox and a lot of his stuff, Corey Good and a lot of his stuff, these other individuals, they have a lot of experience and information. This can't be by just chance. It's not just psychological hogwash or people that are off their minds. There's some of this going on for sure. How much? I don't know. We'll ever know the full details, but I'm sure it is going on, and I'm sure it's been weaponized. This is Roger Martin from Village, Montana.